Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed. Today we have a bit of a special video. It's just a chat with Tim and myself. We're talking about the RTX 3070. So the GeForce RTX 3070, we've put it to our Patreon members. If they have any questions for us, they can ask those. So we'll work through some of those. Tim and myself have a few other things we want to discuss. So this video is basically kind of a recap, kind of just a bit everything RTX 3070 related, would you say, Tim?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of stuff really that's happened since the RTX 3070 launch, with kind of, NVIDIA sneaking the release, or at least the release of the benchmarks just before AMD's RX 6000 announcement. So we kind of got that situation where I don't think we even knew, did we? Because we did get a bit of early info on the RX 6000 stuff, but the 3070 review was already out by that time. So we didn't even know during that review period what AMD was doing. So I think there's a few interesting things we'll talk about, some good questions from our Patreon members, and let's just get into it. So first question in this sort of Q&A session is actually coming from me, because I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this. We haven't really discussed it too much sort of behind the scenes or anything, but so we've now got the RX 6000 information, and we didn't have that at the time that you were posting your review. So knowing what we now know about what AMD's doing on the 6000 series, would that have changed any of your thoughts and opinions for the RTX 3070 review?
I don't think so, just because obviously I'm reviewing the RTX 3070, so a product we have and we've benchmarked, and we now have all the benchmark data. So it's not something that NVIDIA's claiming. We know exactly how it performs. We know that it's offering 2080 Ti-like performance with a bit less VRAM. It's meant to be $500 US. So we know these things about it, and then we knew RDNA 2 was coming. We knew all of this. So at the end of the video, I said, look, here's how the RTX 3070 performs, but we know very shortly, as in tomorrow, AMD's making the announcement, and then shortly after that, we will have benchmarks, and we'll know exactly how these products stack up in terms of performance, value, all that kind of stuff. We'll also have a better picture of availability. So my advice to our viewers would be wait. Don't rush out and buy an RTX 3070 unless you're always going to go NVIDIA no matter what. Hold out and see what we get with this new series. And now we know that we've got the RX 6800. So what's that, like $80 more? I think it was $580 US MSRP. Yep. So $80 more, but the big thing there is obviously double the VRAM buffer. So 16 gigabytes versus 8 gigabytes. That will certainly be of benefit down the track. Right now, not a huge benefit. We are seeing some instances where you're getting pretty close to using that at 1440p. Maybe we'll talk about that a bit later, because I think there are some questions about that. But obviously, if it's a bit faster and it has twice as much VRAM, that seems like a much better value product. But again, I wouldn't have made too much of a big deal out of that in the review, because the review is based on, facts and data and stuff that we have that we verified ourselves, and not what we're getting from NVIDIA or AMD. And so there's I think you talked about, there's features and things like that we don't know, we don't yet know about, like how well they're supported, what they work. We don't know the ray tracing angle yet. So there's a few unknowns, but I think for most people care about, the raw shader performance. They care about the value, and obviously VRAM's a thing, like more is better within reason. And going from 8 to 16 is certainly a lot better, and is something you should factor into the buying decision. So, wouldn't have made any difference to the review, but it would have been something that I would have discussed a little further, let's say. Yeah,
and I think ultimately what AMD's announced is more impacts like a 3080 or 3090 review, given that the pricing is kind of more in direct competition with that. I think, the RX 6800 at $580 is kind of, it really will depend how it performs, because it's not the same price as the RTX 3070's MSRP, or what it's supposed to be on sale for. We'll talk again a bit more about that soon, I'm sure. But, it's not really a direct competitor from that perspective, in that, AMD's clearly going in between 3070 and 3080 pricing, which NVIDIA's left this enormous gap that's allowed this sort of product to exist. So, I think potentially if they had announced a $500 card, there'd be more to talk about in this sort of discussion now, because we go, oh, well, AMD's got this direct competitor, but they kind of don't. It's more about, 6800 XT being $50 cheaper than a 3080, how's that going to stack up? How's the 6900 XT going to stack up against the 3090? Whereas the 3070, I would expect AMD to have more of a competitor at some point, something more around the $500 mark or $450 or whatever it will be. So we'll have to wait and see how that one goes, and whether NVIDIA comes up with sort of what would be a 3070 Ti. It would have to be in between those two to sort of compete with the 6800. There's so much to play out here, so many releases coming out. So, yeah.
Yeah. At the moment, it's looking like AMD's certainly put themselves in a better position. But again, we have to benchmark them. We'll be doing that shortly, I believe. So you'll have a lot more information next month on how those products compare. But yeah, as I said, for now, it looks like AMD's positioned their products quite well. The $80 US difference, it actually really isn't probably going to be that much of a difference. Let's just assume that they have availability and there's some good base models, because a lot of the sort of better 3070 cards, they're sort of $30, $40, $50 over MSRP. So if you can get some good 6800s really on that MSRP, the price difference is going to be very small.
Yeah.
So anyway,
would you say, just on that, would you say that in the past that the better AIB cards on the AMD side come closer to the MSRP than we would get on the NVIDIA side, or is it a bit of a much of a muchness?
Yeah, I think it's much of a muchness. You're usually around that $500 price point. It's usually somewhere between $50 and $100 for the better, more premium models. But, and again, it's very hard to talk about because obviously with stock levels being what they are with the 3070, 3080 and 3090, it's hard to know just how legit those MSRP cards are. Like the Tough Gaming, for example, the non-OC version is meant to be an MSRP card, and we have seen them shipping at the MSRP, so for the moment they kind of are, but it's so low volume, and we've heard other stories about how legitimate the MSRPs are with these NVIDIA cards, so we're just going to have to wait and see, really. It's not something we can nail down right now.
Yeah, and it seems like with the AMD launch as well that they're going with just reference designs, at least for the beginning. A lot of the companies that have come out and announced their cards at this point, they're just showing off the reference design. So,
yeah, that often does happen with AMD products.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure what the difference there is.
Who knows what the pricing situation is going to be, where AIB cards come in. Yeah, as we said, there's a lot to play out. But I think maybe it's time to get into some of the Discord questions. Right, first question here. The very first question, actually, that was asked for this Q&A. Would you agree on that the 3070 release was as big of a failure as the 3080 and 3090 releases? I feel like the pushback of the release date did nothing to change the very poor availability and thus make the whole Ampere launch super underwhelming. If they would have pushed back the release by a couple of months, they might have had better stock and a proper release. So, yeah, what do you feel about this release and sort of the delay that's happened?
Well, yeah, it's frustrating, isn't it? So it seems like there was certainly more 3070 stock than there was of either the 3080 or 3090. I've heard that the 3080 was actually worse than the 3090 from a lot of retailers.
Yep.
But both were abysmal. There was more 3070s, but still nowhere near enough to meet the demand. So while better, still not good, I'm told, basically. Better, but still atrocious in terms of supply. So, yeah, it just seemed like that delay wasn't nearly enough to get it, get anywhere near enough stock to deal with the demand. And they probably knew that. And, yeah, delaying it by a few months, it seems like they probably need a few months to build up the kind of supply inventory that they need. So, yeah, pretty much agree with that. Would you say that it was as big of a failure? Yeah, I mean, they're out of stock everywhere. It depends. So I suppose I should preface this by saying, with these new graphics card releases, we've almost never seen, I'm not even sure we have ever seen, at least in recent history, a very popular, exciting graphics card, something that offers great value or great performance, something that creates a lot of hype and excitement. I don't think we've ever seen a release where they don't go out of stock. Like straight away they sell out on launch day. So that's not abnormal. The problem is they usually start getting resupplied and people are continually buying them over the next week as stock keeps flowing in.
Yeah, weekly resupplies is pretty standard, yeah.
Yeah, and then like 2 weeks down the track it starts to ease, and a month it's like, that first wave of crazy buying's over. and now you can buy one quite comfortably. Whereas that clearly hasn't been the case with the 3080. That's been and the 3090. They've been a complete failure and still are at this point. And I think it's going to be the same with the 3070. From what I'm hearing, it seems like there are larger shipments coming for 3070s than 3080s. So the supply for 3070s, from what I'm hearing from a few different sources, is definitely much stronger, but it's still nowhere near strong enough. Like the 3080 launch was such a failure that retailers that took day one orders, pre-orders, I suppose, they haven't fulfilled all of those yet.
And they're not even close.
No.
Yeah.
So that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. So, yeah, I think the 3070 really, while it hasn't been as bad technically, it's, from your perspective, been just as bad. I think it's fair to say.
I think, though, there's been perhaps a little bit less angst over the 3070 launch than there has been over the 3080, but I'm not sure whether that's because the situation is actually better or whether people just expected it to be the case. Like, they saw the 3080 release and they're like, oh, well, the 3070 is going to be a bit of a mess, so let's forget that. But yeah, it could be a combination of factors, but I agree definitely that the stock is still nowhere near the required level, and I wouldn't be surprised if future launches from all parties, AMD, Intel, Nvidia, all continue to have these issues. But as we said, if we check back in a month, is it in stock? That's the real test. And yeah, the 3080 and 3090 failed, so we'll see where the 3070 lands. All right, next question is, it looks like most of the RTX 3070 cards listed for sale, not that there's much stock, are priced well above the MSRP, at least here in Australia, US dollars 500. That tends to be, $800 Aussie, including tax. Average is around $1,000 for this card, with some going into the RTX 3080 pricing at $1,200. I believe, there was an Asus Strix model or something like that was around that mark.
Sounds about right. Yep.
Who in the supply chain do you think is gaining the most from the increase over MSRP? Are cost for performance comparisons misleading if using an unattainable MSRP? So I think you've done a bit of digging, like with the stuff to see what's going on here.
I've done a lot of asking around, and of course you get conflicting reports. And without any real evidence, you can't say who it is, because you just can't do that. So I don't have any evidence as to who's price gouging, adding the Australia tax. So it seems like for NVIDIA GPUs, we typically get around a 20 to 30% tax here in Australia. Whether that's NVIDIA charging that, the local distributors, it seems like maybe there's a bit going on at the distribution level, because when retailers are able to work directly with partners, they get much better pricing, but that's to be expected anyway. So don't know on that one. But yeah, we do get pretty rolled here in Australia. As you sort of pointed out, the RTX 3070s should be starting at about $800, because a direct conversion gets you to about $700 Australian from the $500 US, and then you add all the shipping and taxes and things like that in. About $800 is where they should start. There's virtually no examples around that price. Most, as you said, averages around $1,000. I think most realistically start about $950, and then $1,000 plus, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And yeah, that basically we focus on the US MSRP because, generally speaking, that's a pretty good, pretty reliable metric for other regions. And yeah, it is a bit broken in Australia because technically, usually we do get better pricing on AMD Radeon GPUs. So again, not sure whether that's because NVIDIA's putting a bit of NVIDIA tax in there, or what the deal is. I can't accuse them of that or claim that's happening, because I have absolutely no evidence to support that. All I can tell you is that GeForce GPUs generally cost more in Australia relative to Radeon GPUs based on the US MSRP.
Yeah, and I think there's a bit of, I'm not sure whether it's confusion, but it's just kind of a fact really, that in a region like ours in Australia, we're kind of a smaller market, so a lot more partners work through distributors on their products, whereas like in the US, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm fairly certain that the larger retailers like Newegg do a lot of their sales and distribution directly with the partners. So when you see like an Asus card on Newegg in the US, they're getting those cards directly from Asus, because Newegg's such a massive retailer, whereas here in Australia, those direct lines aren't necessarily as available, so we kind of get rolled sometimes, as you've been talking about, on the conversions, and Australia tax gets applied at those sort of levels. But as to who specifically is to blame, whether it's the, whether it's ASUS going, oh, well, we're going through a distributor, so we can charge a little bit more, whether that's NVIDIA or whether it's the distributors, or it's just very difficult to pinpoint that. But yeah, the market dynamics in smaller markets like ours are very different to the big US guys that can get away with a lot more stuff and have much closer relationships. Because I'm sure that at Newegg, one model sells through there probably the same amount of stock that we would get for the entirety of Australia. They were selling just one model. So yeah, it's difficult. But I think with the cost per performance, misleading using unattainable MSRPs, we tend to change the prices that we show in our reviews over time as we get a better idea of the actual price. So we might do like an MSRP chart and then a current retail price chart, because obviously some cards will increase in price, but also others will get cheaper over time. Cards like RX 590 being a great example that drastically dropped in price over time. So yeah, that tends to be the sort of best way to do it, but obviously you can't do that at launch, which creates a few issues there.
That's right. We have to take them at their word, unfortunately, for launch. We can't say, no, we don't think this is going to be a $500 US product. It's probably going to be $600 US. Let's make all our entire recommendation, everything based on that. We can't do that. We have to go off the MSRP. There may be a point where we would stop doing that if NVIDIA never ever met their MSRPs and we knew sort of what percentage they usually overshoot. But we've only seen that once with the 2080 Ti at this point. So
yeah, and wasn't it around the Turing launch as well? They had a pre-order period for those cards, if I'm not mistaken, and people knew the price before the reviews of the AIB cards. So
yeah, it was a month in advance.
Yeah, I recall around that launch we had sort of a better idea of the MSRP versus actual sales price, so that we could include that in the reviews. And it is possible that a company like NVIDIA sort of learnt that lesson. I mean, doing pre-orders is always beneficial for the company, but I think it's also beneficial to not do it from their perspective, so they can, I guess, more advertise or more focus reviews towards talking about the MSRP. Because if we don't know what the pricing is ahead of time, then we can't go and do that sort of comparison in the reviews, which does benefit a company like NVIDIA from the marketing side. Doesn't benefit them from the pre-order side, but
they're only going to get away with that for a very limited time. Because if we start seeing, NVIDIA announced an MSRP and then it ends up being 20-30% over MSRP, then reviewers will just start to add 20 to 30% on top of whatever their claimed MSRP is, which is, we ended up calling the 2080 Ti a $1,200 US product, not a $1,000 US product, and we've explained that in our reviews and why that is. With the RTX 3080, I don't know, what will we be calling that in 6 months' time? It's impossible for us to know, which is why we can't do it now. We have to constantly reevaluate and make those adjustments as we go. And that's what we'll be doing. So when you see head-to-head comparisons between these GPUs in 3, 4, 5, 6 months, whatever it may be, we'll, as Tim says, we may do an MSRP comparison, and then we'll do an actual real-world retail comparison. So we try to make it as clear to you guys as we possibly can. But yeah, right now, it's impossible to say what these cards are going to actually end up costing. And some people are getting them for the MSRP. It's just... It's some people, a very limited group of people have managed to get them at MSRP. So anyway, that's that one.
All right, next question here. Simple question. If people are scalping 3070s for highly inflated prices, would a second-hand 2080 Ti be a better option? They seem to be priced on par with the 3070s retail price. So I'm assuming $500 there when you say retail price. Just before I get your answer, I think... based on the performance that we've seen with the cards being pretty equal, the 2080 Ti having the extra VRAM is the better product. That's just my opinion based on seeing your reviews. What do you reckon? Would you share my opinion on that one?
Yeah, no, I do. The power difference is pretty negligible. As you say, the performance difference is very, very small. The only time the performance difference is worth talking about is when you run out of VRAM at 4K. Admittedly, that's not happening in a lot of titles right now, but we are starting to see more and more examples, and I suspect by this time next year we'll have many more. So yeah, I think the 2080 Ti is still the better product of the two, if they were to be the same price. So totally agree with that. The only problem is you're buying secondhand versus
exactly.
new at the same price. So there's warranty considerations and the usual secondhand pitfalls there. So it's not an ideal solution. Having said that, if I had said to you 2-3 months ago, here's a 2080 Ti for $500 US, you probably would have snapped that thing up pretty quickly. So not a terrible situation either. It's just unfortunate that you don't have much choice. The RTX 3070 is not there, so if you want something around that performance for that price, it's a second-hand 2080 Ti by the sounds of it.
Next question is, do you think releasing the 3070 with only 8GB of memory as a 2080 Ti replacement in performance was a mistake, given there is both competition from Radeon as well as more games likely to require that amount of memory? Did Nvidia not use the memory situation this way to sell the 3080 versus 2080, where the 2080 performed quite a bit worse than it should at 4K? I think we did see a bit of that in some benchmarks, but interested to hear your thoughts, because we've just been, at least I've been doing a fair bit of benchmarking of Watch Dogs Legion, and at 1440p, if you're maxing that game out, you're quite likely to be over the 8GB memory limit. So even at 1440p with ray tracing.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's dicey.
Yep, sorry. Yeah, did they make a mistake? Well, so far the evidence would suggest no, because by adding twice as much memory at the same price, they would have cut into their margins quite heavily. So they can't make enough to sell at this point. So the demand is much higher than that. So 8GB from Nvidia's perspective certainly seems like the way to go. I think as a buyer, it'll probably prove to be a bit of a mistake at some point in the future, a year or two down the track. But as Tim said, we're already seeing some examples, even at 1440p, where if you want to run the game maxed out with all, the high definition texture pack, what is it, the Ultra HD texture pack or whatever it is, if you want to use that kind of stuff in the latest games, then you're going to be right on the edge there, and there will be. I haven't tested Watch Dogs to see what the performance like. Is it sort of like Doom Eternal, where there's just a bit of a performance hit, but your frame time performance is still respectable? It's still quite smooth. There's just a bit of a reduction in performance. Is that
based on what I've seen? It really depends on sort of the area in the game. You do get the performance hit. I was testing with just as an example, I was actually testing the 1660 Super, or one of those 6GB cards, and testing at 1440p with even high textures was over the 6GB limit. It was like 6.5 gig, and the performance was a lot worse overall than using the medium textures, which was like 4.5 gig of limit according to the game. So the performance was like halved once I was over the limit, but it wasn't necessarily the frame rate. The average frame rate was high, but the 1% low was low. It was just the overall frame rate was low. But then playing the game, it was kind of like walking around. It was okay at times. Obviously, you get the lower performance, but then driving was like horrible. And there are issues with driving in that game overall, but obviously loading in a lot of stuff in and out of the memory and exceeding the memory limit there was causing issues. So I would imagine you'd see something similar with those 8 gig cards.
Yeah, it very much depends on the game, how the game's loading certain assets and how much of certain things it's doing. So it can be game dependent, but it's also how much you're exceeding that limit by as to what kind of impact it'll have on performance. So again, Doom Eternal still runs buttery smooth, but you lose a bit of performance. And obviously the further you go over, then you start losing more performance, and eventually you get to the territory of really bad frame stuttering and stuff like that. But that may happen a lot quicker in something like Watch Dogs. So, but from NVIDIA's point of view, probably not much of a mistake just yet. Yeah. Was there anything else in that question that we had to address?
I think would you say that these cards are sort of coming out onto the market more on the edge than we've seen from previous generations, where I think 6 or even 8 gig has sort of been fine for a few years, and then over time it's got worse? It seems like with this launch we're already there at the point where we don't have to wait for a game to use more than 8 gig of memory. There are games like Flight Simulator and Watch Dogs Legion and Doom Eternal that are already pushing the boundaries there. It really feels like this is it's much more of a close to the wire than we've ever been with sort of a new GPU launch.
No, I agree with that, definitely. And that's obviously the problem and why so many people are asking about it.
Yeah.
Of course, it's one of those situations where if it was a $200, sort of like go back to the RTX 2060, for example, a more affordable, what was that, like $350 upon release,
that's
something
right.
like that. Yep. So you go down on a product like that, and it only had 6 gigabytes of VRAM, which, again, that was sort of right on the edge at the time as well. But for the, again, most games were okay, especially at 1440p, but it's a cheaper product. So if you have to dial the texture quality down one notch to avoid any kind of performance hit or stuttering, you're usually happy to make that compromise at that price point. That price point's more about making the odd quality compromise.
Yeah.
But when you start getting to $500 plus, you're not really wanting to make those kind of compromises, especially when there's enough GPU horsepower to play at acceptable frame rates. There's just not enough buffer. So, yeah, for me, this whole VRAM thing really comes down to what price you're talking about. It's unacceptable, I think, at $500 plus. You really want to be able to play all the latest and greatest games for the next year or two without any VRAM limitation concerns. But when you're talking $200 to $300, it's like, yeah, okay, a compromise here or there, probably not the end of the world. That's my take on it anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a fair take. Are there any third-party 3070 models that fall between $500 and $580 US? If Nvidia does release a 3070 Ti, would it still be fair to do performance comparisons between the 6800 and 3070 despite the nominal MSRP price gap? What do you reckon?
Well, I'll start with the first part. So yes, there are third-party cards, partner cards at the MSRP. Can't buy them, but they are listed at there's cards at $500 US, and there's ones just slightly above that maybe have slightly better coolers or whatever. So the MSRP cards exist, you just can't buy them. Whether they'll exist in numbers where you can buy them in the next 2, 3, whatever months, that's something, again, we've talked about earlier that we'll have to monitor. Because if we get to early next year and it's still like the MSRP cards are out of stock, but you can buy the $550 versions, then the $500 US MSRP wasn't a thing. It was $550 or $600 or whatever it may end up being. So that's that one. As for the TI model, I can't really comment on that, can I? Because we know nothing about it.
Yeah, so it really depends where the pricing comes in on that. It's just, I think people are assuming it will be around there, but who knows? I mean, they can do anything.
No idea on that one. Yeah, I can't really comment on that. So we'll move on.
The 3080, 3090 and 3070 all sold out in seconds because of low inventory and high demand. Do you expect demand to be as high for Team Red's upcoming products? And have you heard from retailers if supply will be any higher than Nvidia's supply?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, just based on it being AMD, I think numbers for numbers, I don't think the demand will be as high. People tend to, in the more mainstream market, will go down the Nvidia path more than they'll go down AMD. So I would expect that if you're putting a number on how many cards the demand was for each brand, AMD's number is going to be lower. But I guess the question is, among AMD fans, is demand going to be sky high? And that's, yes, it is. There's a lot of hype around it. So
I agree with that generally, though I think where it might be a bit wrong is I honestly think Nvidia has done AMD the biggest favor ever, because they've created this huge amount of hype for next generation GPUs. And remember, they're releasing them closely together. This isn't a staggered 6-month cycle where you get, mid-cycle, you get the competitor's GPU and, so on and so forth, where the hype kind of dies off by that point. Nvidia has just created this huge amount of hype. We've seen the drama it's causing by people not being able to buy these cards with that targeted performance. If AMD comes out with the same sort of performance or even slightly better performance, we don't know yet, but even if it's ballpark, which it certainly seems to be, and the pricing's better or similar, I think these people that have been hitting F5 for a month now, potentially months by this point, they're just going to go stuff it. I want that level of performance. I want RTX 3090 level of performance. If I can get that from a 6900 XT for $500 off, that's what I'm buying. And I think they'll sell more of those cards than they would have otherwise. So I really do think that Nvidia's done AMD a big favor.
I agree with that. I do think there are some, while that is definitely true, there's still going to be that group of people, that the AMD avoiders who might be waiting for things like drivers to see how that goes. Because obviously, we've even seen some stuff in our Twitter feed on this, but, are drivers going to be an issue? What's the driver situation going to be like for these products? And should I wait or do whatever based on drivers? So there is that sentiment. And unfortunately for AMD, they kind of dropped the ball on the 5700 XTs on that, which is going to cause them sort of that reputational damage for the next gen. So it is going to be an interesting situation to see how all those factors play out. Are NVIDIA's issues going to drive people to AMD, or are AMD's previous issues going to drive people back away again? There's so many things to play out there. But I think one thing that's working really strongly in AMD's favor, apart from the NVIDIA situation, is the fact that they're using the same process node. So same TSMC 7 nanometer. They're not having to wait for a new fab node to spin up and get good yields before they can push out lots of inventory, which is sort of maybe what is going on with NVIDIA and using Samsung 8 nanometer. The fact they're on the same node means they're very familiar with it. They've already, I'm assuming, got fairly significant stock orders because they're already producing Radeon Zen products on that. They're producing Zen 3 on it. So that should play into their hands significantly. And it doesn't seem as much that they're rushing the release. So it doesn't seem like they're pushing these cards out and then 2 weeks they've asked their AIBs to design the cards and sell them. It seems to be that the AIBs have known about this for a little while. They've been able to get their products ready. They're not releasing the AIB cards at the same time by the looks of it, which is going to help again. So yeah, lots of stuff happening that I think is going to work in their favor from a supply perspective, but we don't have exact numbers on it.
No, I don't really have any idea at all. I've sort of asked around, but it's a bit too early to see how strong the numbers are. I certainly hope that it's better than what we've seen from NVIDIA. I'd expect that it would be. But again, I wouldn't freak out or panic when they hit shelves or online retailers and they end up selling everything they've currently purchased from AMD, because that's almost certainly going to happen. It's how quickly stock gets refilled. So how quickly they refresh all that sort of stuff, we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, I think like I said, NVIDIA's done them a favor here. They've created a whole lot of hype and excitement. People are ready to part with the money and they can't, and they're going to want to. So,
yeah.
But of course, we have to review them, see how legit AMD's claims are, and there's a whole lot of other stuff that has to happen. So, yeah, next month's going to be very interesting.
I agree. Next question. We do get this a fair bit, so it's probably worth touching on it just at least a little bit briefly. Will you be running a Blender render benchmark against the 2080 Ti, cycles versus cycles, optics versus optics, CUDA versus, RT and tensors and all that? Yeah, we don't usually do that, I wouldn't have thought. I mean, I don't think that you'd have planned that sort of content, would you?
No, not really. We do that sort of stuff for CPU testing, but it's just because CPUs are often used for more than just gaming, but... And again, that is true, obviously, for GPUs, but our audience is more gaming focused. We built the channel. Originally, the channel was really built through big GPU and CPU benchmarks where we test a whole heap of games. If I did a video looking at GPU productivity performance, it would get next to no views. It's just, that's not what our core audience is interested in. Honestly, it's not really what I'm that interested in. The reason you see extremely exhaustive, insane benchmarks from us is because I actually enjoy doing them. I find it quite interesting, and I like seeing all the results, and it's not something that you get everywhere. So yeah, that's why I sit down and do that for stupid amounts of hours. But yeah, not. I'm sure there's probably other places that are more interested in that stuff and more knowledgeable and cover that stuff better than what we would.
Yeah, I agree. Next question is, any word regarding ITX cards based on either 3070 or the big Navi equivalent?
Well, I would think that it would be possible. It depends on how ITX you're talking about. Certainly not the sort of 170mm cards, though someone will probably go and make one now and make me look silly. But I think Zotac made a gaming, 1080 Ti Mini. So that was 211mm long, and that's 250 watt card. So it's certainly possible in that power envelope. So I think right now Zotac have a gaming card that's 232. I just got it here somewhere. Yeah, the Twin Edge, 232mm long. So that's probably a bit too long to be classified as sort of a mini ITX thing. A good channel to actually ask this question is Ali over at Optimum Tech. He covers all this ITX stuff in much more detail than we ever do. So he'll probably, if you want to jump over to his channel and ask him, or ask him on Twitter, he'll probably be able to answer that one. But basically, there is nothing yet. So no word on them. I haven't heard anything from anybody. But yeah, 232 millimeters is the most compact dual slot 3070 so far. And I think the FE card's like a centimeter longer than that. It's like 242 or something like that.
Yep.
So that's another good option for mini ITX builds. But yeah, I don't know if they'll get any more compact than that.
All right, and I think we've got the final question for our 3070 Q&A session here. It comes from Papa Sauce. What are your thoughts on the 3070 not using GDDR6 or 6X, sorry, or a larger memory bus? Do you think it will have memory bottlenecks like how several of the 16 and 20 series cards had?
Did I do any benchmarks on the 1620 series cards having bottlenecks? I don't actually recall. I've done way too many benchmarks. I thought that they actually weren't memory limited.
I don't think they were too constrained. I mean, 3070
it's a bit
has 2080 Ti like performance, and that was a GDDR6 product, wasn't it?
I honestly cannot remember that. I did a benchmark. Oh, it's a bit embarrassing. I cannot remember the conclusion now. But like, people focus on bus widths and things like that way too much, in my opinion. It's like, don't compare them on paper so much. Just benchmark them and see how they stack up that way. I mean, the 3070 matches the 2080 Ti.
Yeah.
The only time it falls behind is really from a lack of VRAM, which that can be helped out by bandwidth. But at the end of the day, it performs pretty well. And to make it a bigger GPU, it just makes it more expensive. So that's what they're offering for $500.
Yeah, I mean, GDDR6X costs more, uses more heat. I mean, all of these are design considerations. And if they've already got 2080 Ti like performance, then they probably were satisfied with the memory configuration that they were using on the cards. Obviously, the VRAM's a bit of a different story, but at least the bus width and that sort of thing in the same memory is fine.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I overclock the memory, it improves performance a little bit, but it doesn't scale as much as it would if it was heavily memory limited. But
yeah.
I haven't done detailed or in-depth benchmarking looking at that, but it is what it is. I mean, it performs pretty well.
Yep.
If you could get it, if it was readily available at $500 US, I think right now anyway, it would be a great value product. We've talked earlier about $80 more gets you the 6800, twice as much VRAM. Maybe that's a much better value product, but we'll have to wait and see on that one.
All right, and I think that just about does it for our 3070 sort of Patreon question Q&A session to talk about a few of the things that have come up since the 3070 review. There's been just so much happening in the hardware world over the last couple of weeks that it's hard to keep track of everything, and certainly lots of people have questions about stuff that's happened since those reviews have come up. So yeah, good to get on, have a chat, use our little monitor Steve setup that we've got going here. It's been a bit of fun.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the questions and concerns people have, we just cannot answer right now. It's often the way. But yeah, as we said, you can rest assured we will keep monitoring it. We'll keep updating our content. You know, you guys know we like to revisit things and reevaluate. Yeah, that's right. We'll continue to do that. So, but also, as Tim said, plenty more stuff coming up. We have I think there's these new CPUs. Have you heard of these new CPUs that are...
No, I haven't heard about anything from Intel, no.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, but yeah, there'll be, I think, some CPU-related content coming up on the channel very, very shortly. Then obviously we have some new GPUs that we've been talking about coming out next month, and expect some reviews on them pretty early on in the month, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Just lots of content. Not a whole lot of sleeping on my end, but that's all right. I love doing it. I'm really excited about it. I'm as excited as you guys are, so I'm happy not to sleep. Sometimes I don't actually want to go to sleep. I just want to keep running the next benchmark to see what the result is, because, yeah, it's getting really exciting now. A lot of competition in both the CPU and GPU markets. So, yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, it's good.
But anyway, this was good just to have a casual chat about a couple of these things, and hopefully those of you listening away enjoyed it.
Yep. Sounds good to me. Yeah. I mean, what is it usually at this point? Just sign up to our Patreon page, I guess, if you want to participate in a
Do
few of
that.
these things in the future. We've also obviously got just our Discord chat and live streams that we do from time to time, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, subscribe to the channel. But if you're watching at this point, you're probably already subscribed because we're kind of in the 20% club zone at this point. And I think that pretty much does it. So
Yeah. I think next month we'll probably be doing, I would say we'll do at least 2 Patreon live streams, if not 3.
do you mean
busy
this month? Because
next
we're in
month.
November at this point.
Oh, yes, we are. We are in November. See, I can't even catch up with where we're at. Yes, so this month,
Could be a few streams.
Could be a
could be a
Could
few.
be a live stream later this week. Yeah. Anyway,
Cool.
Before I get more confused with where we're at, I've got to get back to benchmarking.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, anyway, thank you very much for watching. And I guess we'll see you guys next time. I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim. See you in the next one.